Because it is my guilt, I claim you, grievous miracle. Make my chest hurt with regret. Forge your punishment and nail it deep. Shake my guilt once again.
Yeah, when a game opens like that, you know you're in for an interesting ride. Hey, do you like weird stuff? Well, boy, have I got a game for you, because this game is like the Mozart of weird stuff. And Mozart wrote an aria called Lick My Butthole, so that's a high bar. I have something of a love-hate relationship with this game. On the one hand, its difficulty curve is more like a difficulty bar graph, but there's so much variety and fascinating imagery that you really want to see what might be lurking in the next room. As you might have guessed from the title of this video, it's going to be really difficult to talk about this game without making a lot of comparisons to Dark Souls, and since it's become a bit of a meme to call things the Dark Souls of such and such, I'm going to do my best to keep that to a minimum, but it's very clear from the gameplay perspective that Blasphemous was heavily inspired by the Souls series. For example, it has a heavy focus on combat centered around pattern recognition and quick twitch parrying, as well as having enemies respawn whenever a checkpoint is used. In fact, the Souls series is actually directly referenced within the game in such a way as to imply that they take place in concurrent universes. All of that aside, Blasphemous lore and visuals are rooted in Catholic folklore and imagery, and man is it fascinating to look at. The art style simultaneously invokes a clear attention to detail and a rough around the edges aesthetic that brings to mind classic medieval paintings and sculptures. There's so much care put into building this world that it's nearly impossible not to get sucked in. Every item and piece of equipment you pick up has its own lore and history, and you can spend hours just reading the descriptions in the inventory menu. In fact, it may actually be a good idea to do that, since a lot of the items' descriptions contain hints to finding hidden items and side quests throughout the map. The only thing that doesn't really get any sort of lore built around it are the enemies, and I feel like that's really a shame, since the designs are so unique and fascinating. I want to know more about them, and I feel like some sort of compendium or bestiary is sorely missing. So the basic spoiler-free plot is that some apocalyptic event called the Miracle has occurred, in which all pain, suffering, regret, and sin in the world has actually taken on physical form, causing certain holy people to ascend to a higher realm of existence as sorta twisted angels, corrupted people to mutate into grotesque monsters, and corrupted but repentant people to become servants to a singular cause. The game starts up in some kind of graveyard filled with mountains of corpses of identical knights all wearing silly, pointy hats, where we meet our main character, the silliest and pointiest hatted of them all. This character is known only as the Penitent One, or the Penitent One in Silence, and although he never says a word, he communicates his mission pretty clearly, namely to annihilate the Cronenbergian monstrosities that are currently wandering around his front yard. I don't want to get too into the story, just because most of the joy of this game is in seeing what kind of twisted abominations are hiding behind each corner, and how they all tie into the larger lore of the world, and this really is a game where you want to dive into it knowing as little as possible about it. The creativity and attention to detail on display here is just phenomenal. Every area has an entirely unique atmosphere, and although there are enemies that get recycled across every region, they all also have a slate of special enemies that you'll only find in that particular zone. Sometimes you'll even have two of the exact same enemies standing next to each other, but they'll have different health levels, meaning you're never really able to settle into a pattern and have to constantly improvise since you can't be sure which attack will be the killing blow. There's a real brilliance to the layout of monsters because they're all set out in such a way that their strengths and weaknesses complement each other, and you have to pay very close attention to exactly who and what you're dealing with in order to take them down. See, each foe you encounter has its own attack patterns, and learning those patterns, as well as which attacks can be dodged, parried, or simply ducked under, is tantamount to survival. If you're quick, you can block and counter certain attacks with your sword, but some enemies are too strong to parry, or have a secondary shockwave to their attack that cuts through your defenses. With these enemies, you have to time your dodge skill just right and take advantage of the couple moments of invincibility it gives you to stay safe. My advice? As soon as you unlock the ability to upgrade your sword, work towards getting the sliding thrust and drop attacks as soon as possible. They deal massive damage and can strike multiple enemies at once, making them excellent for crowd control or getting yourself out of sticky situations. Also, in your offensive arsenal, you have a suite of magical attacks called prayers that can be found by exploring the world or completing certain objectives. These prayers are invoked at the cost of a sort of magic bar, which the game calls fervor, and it can be a lifesaver once you've figured out which ones work best for which situation and how to time them properly. Your fervor bar is a bit fickle, though. You see, it can be filled by striking enemies, performing special execution moves, or sacrificing a small amount of your own health, but it depletes each time you use a projectile attack or prayer, and if you die, your fervor bar will shorten by a significant amount, meaning if you die enough times, it can become entirely unusable. You can undo the damage by returning to where you died and absorbing the little ghost you left behind, or you can leave it there as a little monument to your failure, which is actually what the game is getting at, considering they call that little ghost the weight of guilt. And again, you can either get it back by going directly to it, or by visiting certain shrines and offering a sacrifice in exchange for having your guilt lifted. Reabsorbing the ghost will also reward you with some health and fervor, so it can be helpful to leave one at a boss as sort of an emergency pick-me-up. You see, even dying eventually plays into how you strategize in this game. And you will die. A lot. A lot. A lot. See, here's the thing. Blasphemous is about as unforgiving as it can possibly be without being straight up impossible. It's easy to get juggled around by enemies, and each hit you take eats up so much of your health bar that even lower tier enemies can take you out in just a couple of hits. There's also no real directions to speak of. You have full range to explore right from the jump, so it's easy to wander into areas that you aren't even close to ready for way too early on, or spend a good chunk of time fighting your way down the same hall over and over to see what's on the other side, only to find it dead-ended because you don't have the right item yet. For example, a common instinct in this kind of game is to want to climb upward, but the upper levels are some of the most difficult in the game, so it can be way too easy to end up stuck there and having a really hard time moving forward or getting back. Couple that with the fact that one side quest actually has a secret timer on it that triggers as soon as you enter the upper levels, and you have a recipe for failure that you didn't even know you were preparing. And that's just the intended difficulty, which leads me to one of my biggest issues with Blasphemous, namely that it still needs a bit of polish. And I'm sure it will get it, given that it's still regularly updated and given new free content from the developers, but for now there are some real issues that I have with certain aspects of exploration and combat, so let's work our way up from least annoying to most annoying. One of the most important items you have at your disposal in Blasphemous is your rosary. Each bead added to it will offer you a small buff, and you can expand the maximum number of beads by visiting a special NPC. The rosary is important from both a gameplay and story perspective, as your survival depends on ensuring you have the right loadout for the area you're in. It's also used to trigger certain gameplay events if you equip the right beads at the right time, and is even used to unlock one of the endings. That said, a lot of the beads have such similar effects that it hardly seems worth having the alternates, and a lot of them barely seem to do anything at all. A few are also only useful against one or two very specific bosses, and they barely offer enough of a boon to bother using them over whatever selection you're used to having. This is pretty minor considering the beads themselves are still fun to find and collect, and some of them have really cool effects that are fun to combine and play around with, but I still felt it was worth mentioning. There's another selection of equipable items called relics, which can be discovered by completing side quests or exploring the world. These are mainly used to make exploration easier or uncover secret pathways and items that would otherwise be inaccessible. The problem is you can only equip 3 at a time, and having the wrong one equipped at the wrong place can lead to a pretty unceremonious death, so you're going to find yourself having to constantly pause the game to swap around your equipped relics so you have the right combination for the area you're in. It's not a terrible system, but it feels unnecessarily padded. The relic's effects are so specific, and some have no real use beyond revealing some minor hidden lore that I genuinely don't understand why they aren't all just equipped and active from the moment you pick them up. It smacks of having a limited selection just for the sake of making the game feel more complex than it actually is. And given that the game is already pretty complex, it just feels entirely unnecessary to me to make you pick and choose which ones are active. Moving up from the intentional mechanics, let's talk about unintentional ones. Or at least the ones that I assume are unintentional. I hope they're unintentional. There are certain floating enemies that will either shoot projectiles or rush at you after a brief charge, and fortunately you can interrupt their attacks by hitting them before their charge is complete, but they're capable of clipping through the walls or floors or ceilings on either side of the stage, meaning they're able to attack you while you can't reach them. This gets especially annoying when you're trapped in a room where the door's shut and you can't leave until you take them out. Combat can also be frustrating on cliffs or near climbable walls, since you strike the wall with your sword to climb them, meaning you'll often be attempting to attack an enemy and just end up clinging to the wall like a confused housefly while your opponent sneaks up underneath you to swat a few hit points off your butt like a piñata filled with meat. You'll also find yourself getting a hard line booted off of cliffs and ledges into instant kill pits frequently, because some enemies deal massive knockback damage, and they always seem to be stationed over bottomless chasms or pits of spikes. Their habit of standing right on top of ledges that you are hanging from means you can't really avoid it either, and just have to hope you get lucky with the timing of climbing up the ledge. Sometimes an enemy will just be too damn big to effectively parry or dodge through, meaning your best strategy is to just wail on them and hope you have enough healing items to stay in the fight. There is the occasional glitch when fighting bosses, usually in their final phase, which causes you to fail through no fault of your own. The two specific instances I can remember was one teleporting boss rematerializing in such a way that it tricked the game into thinking I was stuck in a wall. The result was that I could no longer move or attack and just had to watch myself slowly roast to death. Another time was during the final boss fight. I got him down to the last few hits on his health bar when all of a sudden the penitent one was struck with such crippling stage fright that he actually sunk right through the floor. The game respawned me back at the start of the boss fight, and after I managed to beat him, it basically said, "Oh, wait, that doesn't count," and respawned me outside the boss room with him still alive and well inside as if nothing happened at all. However, all of that pales in comparison to how much I hate this one particular enemy. I mean, just look at these smug little jerks. They throw this boomerang that's nearly impossible to dodge, hits you twice, and will kill you in 3 shots, and your attacks won't interrupt their throw. They also tend to be clustered together down long hallways, making them almost completely unavoidable. This one enemy is responsible for more rage quits than any other obstacle I encountered in any of my playthroughs. Lastly, there is sort of a new game plus mode that introduces some new mechanics, quests, enemies, and items that you can't find on your first run, but I'm not entirely sure I recommend it yet, since you go into it about as strong as you can possibly get, and they crank up enemy health and damage output to an obscene level, so it feels less challenging and more unfair. Combat aside, this is at heart a Metroidvania game, meaning there's a deep emphasis on exploration. You'll spend a huge chunk of time obsessively checking over your map for anything you might have missed or areas you haven't explored, all while making your own mental maps and notes about areas to revisit once you have the items needed to open them up. Some areas are cordoned off by item requirements or are walled off behind particularly tough enemies, but the rewards for exploring are always worth the challenge of getting there. This is a very rare game, and that never once was I disappointed by what I found when exploring. Sometimes your only reward for leaving the obvious path is unlocking a shortcut back to the nearest checkpoint, but even that is rewarding in and of itself, except in the bizarrely frequent case of the shortcut actually being a more difficult path than just taking the long way around. Add the improvisational quick-twitch combat to the methodical puzzle-solving and exploration mechanics, and the whole experience invokes the feeling of solving a particularly difficult puzzle, except the puzzle is on fire and made of angry bees and arsenic. Now, I want you to think about all the negative things I had to say about this game, and then think about how good it must be as a whole for me to still be recommending it as highly as I am. Sincerely, this may just be one of my favorite games of all time. Now, it's not perfect. Far from it. It is TV-shattering levels of frustrating, and it's unforgiving to the point of absurdity, but I can't think of a single reason not to go take a look at it. If you're a fan of unique art, simultaneously grotesque, horrifying, and beautiful imagery, unforgiving combat, and rewarding gameplay and exploration, Blasphemous delivers all of that and more by the truckload, and I have no doubt that if it were released at the height of Metroidvania popularity, we'd be referring to the genre as Blasphemous likes. Do yourself a favor and at least check out some Let's Plays online. You will not be disappointed. Thanks for stopping by. I'll see you next time. Hey, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this week's video. I am trying to get these out a little more frequently, and I do apologize for not having them out as frequently as I would like. I seem to have a pretty good handle on getting them out every other week, but I would like to start getting them out every week. I've got a new computer coming in pretty soon, which should be able to handle my video editing software a little bit better. And that'll prevent a lot of the delays I've had with fighting the constant crashes and freeze-ups while I'm trying to put these videos together. So hopefully that means I'll be able to start releasing more frequently and higher quality videos. Anyway, as always, thank you for stopping by. If you liked the video, please leave a like and subscribe. Drop a comment if you can think of anything you'd like to have me review. And Really, most importantly, if you don't mind, if you really like the channel, tell your friends about it. Anyway, thank you so much for stopping by, and I will see you soon.